For over 150 years, the Prince Hall Masons of Kansas have carried forward a proud legacy, building institutions, strengthening communities, and advocating for justice. It was once widely believed that it all began in 1865, just after the Civil War, when African Americans in Kansas sought to form fraternal organizations that promoted leadership, mutual aid, and social progress.
But as we dug deeper into the past, we've uncovered more than just well-known history. We found untold truths, stories that were left out, overlooked, or never passed down. The true beginning of Prince Hall Freemasonry in Kansas is more complex and more powerful than we realized.
In October of 1827, a man by the name of William Dominic Matthews was born on the eastern shore of Maryland. Captain Matthews was born to a free family and soon entered into the fisherman's trade. This story would be unremarkable, except for the fact that William Matthews, along his travels, had gained light in Freemasonry, taking upon himself the degrees of Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason, and soon found himself in possession of a charter to establish the first lodge in the state of Kansas, known as Enterprise Lodge Number 9, operating under the jurisdiction of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Indiana. Soon, other lodges followed, and while records are scant due to the conflict known as the American Civil War, what we do know, based upon sources, is that the second lodge established in the state was known as James Sidney Hinton Lodge Number 2. Now, why is this important? James Sidney Hinton was the first African American to serve in the legislature of the state of Indiana, and at the time of the 1850s and 60s, served as Most Worshipful Grand Master of the state of Indiana. Soon, a third lodge, Mount Moriah, was formed, and thus allowing the Brothers of Kansas to have legal authority to establish their own Grand Lodge. However, the story does not end here. Now, before I say anything else, let me make sure I'm clear. My comments are in no way meant to disparage the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas or any other jurisdiction for that matter. They are only meant to create a clearer picture of our common heritage as African American and Prince Hall Freemasons. Nothing more, nothing less. You see, the state of Missouri also had Masonic interest in the state of Kansas, as they had established two lodges there themselves, Western Star Lodge Number 4 and Far West Lodge Number 5. These lodges were overseen by none other than an AME minister who soon would go on to great historic heights himself, known as Reverend Hiram Rhodes Revels, who soon would become the first African American to serve in Congress, finishing out the term of none other than Confederate President Jefferson Davis. On June 24, 1867, these lodges came together to form the Most Worshipful King Solomon Grand Lodge of the state of Kansas, with Captain William D. Matthews elected as Most Worshipful Grand Master. These 5 lodges formed a foundation for a jurisdiction of black Freemasons in the state of Kansas, but much of this history has been erased. Why? Because there were some inconvenient truths surrounding this Grand Lodge, which we will talk about momentarily. The Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of Kansas was established from March 7th to 9th of 1876. However, the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas was established in June of 1867. Now, I know that there are many who may be listening to me who will be surprised by the date that I'm using, but hear me out. One day before the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas was established, on March the 6th of 1876, William D. Matthews incorporated the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas, therefore cementing forever in the record the antiquity of his jurisdiction over that of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge. Or so he thought. Several decades after this occurred, Most Worshipful Grand Master William H. Grimshaw of the District of Columbia would publish his book entitled The Official History of Freemasonry Among Colored People. This book was considered a textbook, a go-to book, a go-to guide for anyone interested in the history of African American Freemasonry for the first half of the 20th century. However, later scholars such as Dr. Charles H. Wesley and Joseph Walks, founder of the Philaxis Society, and a number of others, would soon find that Grimshaw's book was unreliable for historical accuracy. And although there are tidbits that may be able to be utilized, by and large the narrative that Grimshaw creates is one that is whitewashed, fanciful, and in some cases, just outright lies. So, the question obviously may be, what happened? In April of 1869, Captain Matthews and several others were involved in a scandal that rocked the foundation of the King Solomon Grand Lodge. In that month, Henry C. Bruce, one of the first initiates of the King Solomon Grand Lodge, had been shot by a mixed-race man by the name of Alan Pinks. He decided to take out vengeance on Brother Bruce and shot him twice in the chest in front of his own home. Fortunately, Brother Bruce survived. But Captain Matthews and the other brothers of King Solomon Grand Lodge were not going to take that lying down. And so although Alan Pinks was captured by the authorities and taken to a judge for his first hearing, he failed to make bail. And on his way being escorted back to his holding cell, Captain Matthews and between 10 to 12 other brothers of the King Solomon Grand Lodge rode up on horseback, surrounded the party, and gunned Alan Pinks down in broad daylight in front of the sheriff, and then rode off into the sunset. A story worthy of any of our favorite Western flicks. Captain Matthews and these other brothers were arrested, tried, and even the case itself had to be switched to a different county. However, they were all found not guilty. While records are scant, one thing is clear. William Matthews was a man who kept the benefits and the well-being of his race first and foremost in his mind. Although he had been born free, he was not immune from the attacks of racism and bigotry that existed in the 19th century against African American people. And even though he was a free black man, he was always aware that this freedom was a tenuous status at best. William Matthews organized the black community in the state of Kansas around business and entrepreneurship as he established the Waverly House, a restaurant and boarding house that he was able to purchase in the city of Leavenworth, and soon utilized as a stop on the Underground Railroad. It should be no wonder then why Captain Matthews was elected as Most Worshipful Grand Master, because he was in fact a leader of men. Although a controversial one, I will admit. The King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas soon grew to establish other lodges throughout the state of Kansas and also expanded outside of the state's borders. The first lodge chartered after the King Solomon Grand Lodge was established was David G. Lett Lodge No. 6 in the city of Topeka. Captain Matthews and the King Solomon Grand Lodge were also important for another reason. Captain Matthews, being the man that he was, who thought that the well-being of black people and the well-being of Freemasonry were interconnected, sought a charter for the King Solomon Grand Lodge from what was then known as the Most Worshipful National Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Ancient York Masons, or the National Compact. The National Grand Lodge is a structure that we in PHA Freemasonry do not recognize today. However, in the 19th century, it was an important structure that helped bridge the gap in administration for our lodges and Grand Lodges. And although it was very controversial at the time, Captain Matthews was an ardent supporter of it and thought that it was in the best interest of black Masons to have a national governing body. This was the law of the land in the state of Kansas for roughly 10 years. Captain Matthews served as Grand Master unopposed but recognized by other jurisdictions throughout the country. Why do we not know this history? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas was at one time subordinate to the Most Worshipful National Grand Lodge. And as the 1860s concluded, the Most Worshipful National Grand Lodge soon fell out of favor with the majority of Prince Hall Freemasons. First in the year 1868, with the state of Ohio leaving the National Grand Lodge, and in that secession, it started a flood effect. Here in the District of Columbia, we soon would be the second Grand Lodge to leave that structure in 1871, followed by a host of other Grand Lodges. King Solomon Grand Lodge, with Captain William Matthews at its head, stood as a bulwark against these secessions. Captain Matthews showed almost a religious zeal for the National Grand Lodge structure, and any dissent within his jurisdiction was not going to be tolerated. There are some other factors which I think also need to be looked at. For starters, Captain Matthews had served as Grand Master for nearly a decade. And in that decade, he had little opposition. But when he did, his opposition would soon note that any time someone would try to run against him, they soon found themselves suspended for some frivolous reason. Soon, there would be a fallout between Captain Matthews and none other than Reverend David G. Lett and his son Hannibal. David G. Lett, who was the first worshipful master of David G. Lett Lodge number 6, his son Hannibal soon followed him in office, and when Hannibal Lett was worshipful master, he got into a dispute with Grand Master Matthews, which saw David Lett have to step in and say, hey, Grand Master, I understand that you're having a problem with my worshipful master, but my worshipful master is also my son, and I'm not going to let you disrespect my son in this way. The parties parted ways. Hannibal Lett soon found himself very ill. And according to letters that we found and published in Lost Empire, Hannibal Lett, while in his sickbed, received a call from a brother from the King Solomon Grand Lodge with a letter from Grand Master Matthews. The Letts believed that the letter was a get well note, but were soon disappointed to find that Hannibal Lett and his father had been suspended from the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. This soon led to a letter writing campaign all throughout the press in the city of Leavenworth and other cities where the Grand Master Matthews and the Letts were disparage one another and try to talk about how each other were not practicing Freemasonry in the way that it should be practiced. The Letts, however, would soon find that they would have the upper hand because although they were suspended, their opinion of having an independent Grand Lodge was catching fire throughout the Midwest, and they soon sought charters for new lodges from the state of Ohio, establishing their own Western Star Lodge, number 34, which today in the state of Kansas you all would know as Western Star Lodge number 1. Soon, other notable names in the King Solomon Grand Lodge orbit would soon defect to this new jurisdiction, such as Henry C. Bruce, the Reverend Thomas Henderson, a noted pioneer of Royal Arch Freemasonry west of the Mississippi, and a number of others. As these lodges were chartered from Ohio, they would then establish their own Grand Lodge, which we today know as the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of Kansas. We have 2 Grand Lodges with one common history. Now, the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas was, in part, responsible for the birth of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, although there was much controversy at the outset. Soon, the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas would, in its own right, take its stand in the Masonic environment of that day, producing brothers and sisters who would go on to be leaders in education, business, and civil rights. The origins, however, of this jurisdiction are one that still need to be explored. And I would implore the brothers and sisters of Kansas to not only read my book and the sources therein, but to continue to tell their story. Congratulations on serving this jurisdiction and serving our nation for over a century and a half. The story of Prince Hall Freemasonry in Kansas is one that is still being told and can be told best by those who are living. Thank you.